Hello, and welcome to ARTFul Insights. My name is Susan Shifrin. I'm the director of ARTZ Philadelphia, and together, you and I are going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes looking at a few pieces of art together. This video is produced in partnership between Dementia Society of America and ARTZ Philadelphia. Each month, we offer a program online, a live program with a small group of people joining together to talk about works of art from museums and cultural centers across the country, a different museum or center each month. And then in addition to that live program, we then produce a video like this. We will be looking at the same works of art that we did in the live group, but with the video, first of all, it's 30 to 40 minutes in length. You can watch it any time of day or night that suits you. And it's an opportunity to have a more intimate, a more self-driven conversation about these works of art. I will ask a few questions to get us started, give you a few things to think about. I will share with you some of the observations and thoughts that folks from the live program might have brought up that I think might be interesting for you to consider. But really, this video each month is about you. It's about what you see in these works of art, how you respond to them, and just having the opportunity to look at them and think about them at your own pace. If you're watching this video with someone, then by all means, feel free to pause the video from time to time if you'd like, so that you can have your own conversation. If you're watching on your own, then I'm delighted, and it'll be a conversation between the two of us. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the museum or cultural center that we will be visiting this month. Welcome to ARTFul Insights. Today we're going to be looking together at a work of art from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Before we get to that work of art, which I think you're really going to enjoy looking at and talking about with me, I'd like to just have a few moments where we look at some photographs of the National Gallery itself to give us a context for the sense of what it would be like to be in those buildings if we were there in person. And then we will get right to the work of art. So here we see the West Building of the National Gallery of Art. The West Building opened to the public in 1941. That was when the museum itself opened. And then in 1978, the East Wing opened. But before we get to that, I want to just tell you a little bit about the collections that are housed in the National Gallery of Art. At this point, there are more than 150,000 works of art in the permanent collections of the National Gallery of Art. And those collections span the history of Western art in all media, so photography, painting, sculpture, prints and drawings, you name it. So, as I said, this is the West Building, and then let me show you the East Building, which looks very different. As I said, the East Building of the National Gallery of Art looks quite different than the West Building facade, doesn't it? This is where you would enter the East Building. It was designed by architect I.M. Pei, who, among other notable museum architecture, created an addition to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. In any event, the East Wing houses the modern and contemporary collections in the National Gallery of Art collections. So the piece that we will be looking at today, well, I'll leave it to you to think about where it would most appropriately fit. In the East Wing, modern and contemporary art, or in the West Wing, the rest of the collections, so the historical collections. So we will be right back to look at that piece of art that we've been waiting for from the National Gallery of Art collections. So here we are. We finally see the work of art that I've been promising you from the collections of the National Gallery of Art. If you've watched any of our other videos about looking at art together, you will know that one of the things I like to do first is to invite you to take a few minutes and cast your eyes over this work of art. What do you see? What are your eyes drawn to first? Where do your eyes go first when you look at this work? So take a few minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll start our conversation. So I asked you to spend a few minutes looking at this work of art and just to let your eyes wander over it to see what you see. And I asked, what did you find yourself looking at first? Where were your eyes drawn immediately when you first saw this painting? I'm wondering what your answer might have been. So a few questions we could ask as we look at this painting. The first question might be, there are a bunch of figures in this painting. How many are there? And in addition to asking, how many figures are there in this painting, we could ask, what do they look like? Do they all look the same? Or are there differences among the different figures? So why don't we start there? And my guess is you will have arrived at the conclusion, unless I'm missing something, which I could be, that there are see, I told you I was going to miss something. There are 5 figures in this painting. Going from left to right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this very large figure, right? So we have 5 figures. And I asked, are they the same as each other? Are they different from each other? What do you notice about that? My guess is you might have noticed that the figure in the center, more or less the center of the painting, right here, is by far the largest, right? All of the other four figures seem much smaller, dwarfed perhaps, by this central figure. The other thing we might have noticed is that the four smaller figures seem to be moving and either have their hands up. You know, when you look at this figure, you can see that hands are raised, face is pointed upward. If we look at the three additional small figures, they too seem to be moving, don't they? Again, hands raised. They're all in motion of some sort. Do you think? How would you describe that large figure? When we had a group of participants in our online program talk about this painting, one of the first comments was, "A naked angel," from one of our participants. How do we know? I mean, we can talk about the nakedness, but how do we know that this figure is an angel? And we asked that question. Well, angels, as far as we know, have wings. Yes? And this figure seems to have wings. Same color as the rest of the figure's body, but they look like wings, right? So that's one thing, the naked angel. Someone suggested, as we were talking about, is this angel wearing clothes? Do angels wear clothes? The person who had first said naked angel said, well, angels don't generally wear clothes. That was up for grabs. But the other thing that we talked about was, because this figure seems to be all of one color, could it be a silhouette of this figure? Now, often in silhouettes, which are, you could think of them as representations of shadows, the outline of a figure that we would see if that figure had a shadow cast against a wall behind the figure, right? Could this be a silhouette? Many silhouettes show a figure in profile. And sure enough, it does seem that we see the face of this figure in profile. We see the nose, the mouth, the chin. We don't see details of eyes or expression as we might if we were seeing a full front face. One other difference that we might consider is the four figures, smaller figures, are they holding anything? They don't seem to be, do they? So perhaps that's an additional difference from the central large figure. What is that figure holding? Well, perhaps one of the first things you might have noticed is this. In the figure's right hand, there is an object. What do you think that object is? What does it look like to you? The participants who were taking part in our online group conversation about this painting said they thought it was a key, a very large key. What do you think? So perhaps this is a key. But as we work our way further up this figure, we see that in the other hand, perhaps the left hand, if we think that perhaps this figure has its back to us, so the wings are facing us and the figure has its back to us. Anyway, in the hand that isn't holding the key, there is, what does this look like to you? Some sort of musical instrument, isn't it? Maybe a horn of some sort? Do you notice anything else about the way the figure is holding the horn? What do we see? We see perhaps that this figure is actually playing the horn, blowing the trumpet, right? Because the what do we call it? The stem of the horn, I think that's not the correct term, but I'm going to use it anyway and hope that you know what I mean, seems to be in the figure's mouth, right? Lips pursed around it. Okay, so perhaps we are hearing a trumpet. So we've already said that there are 4 small figures and 1 large figure. Why do you think those figures might be smaller? Are they younger figures than the central one? Younger people? That's what one of our participants in our group conversation online thought. If there's 1 large figure and 4 small figures, could those smaller figures be young? And the taller figure who fills up from top to bottom perhaps is older. That's one possibility. Is there another possibility that you can think of why a painter, an artist, would give us 1 huge figure and then 4 smaller figures? What might that suggest to us? Now, as we look at the other figures that we've talked about, we've already said they are in movement. In the case of, well, let's go left to right. So we have, I'm just going to draw a square around the figures at the lower left. So what are they doing? If we think maybe all of these figures are in silhouette, we don't see the details of their faces, but we get a sense of what they're doing, right? So we see a head turned upwards, right? If we imagine the eye right here, that figure would be looking upward. What is this figure doing, do you think? Looking upward or in another direction? And what about this figure? Hands are outstretched, upturned. Perhaps the face is also upturned. We can't quite see, can we? It's a little mysterious. But we do see those arms reaching up. So these figures are in motion, hands upturned, some of their faces are upturned. What do you think they're doing? This was something else that came up in our conversation with our group online. And the opinions varied. Some of our participants said, it looks like they're celebrating, joyfully celebrating. Others said, it looks like they're in supplication. They're pleading for something. Another person said, no, they're giving thanks. So, celebration or giving thanks. So we have supplication or pleading, giving thanks, and celebration. Do any of these sound convincing to you? In order to make a decision, what more would you need to know about what's going on in this painting, do you think? One thing we haven't talked about is, are these men? Are they male figures, female figures, figures in transition? What do you think? One of our participants said that she felt very strongly that this figure off by itself at the right margin of the painting was definitely a female figure, and that the others in the left lower corner were all male figures. So we had a conversation about why she thought that. And she said, she looks like she's giving thanks, asking forgiveness or giving thanks, but look at her hands. This participant said, look at her hands. They look like women's hands, according to Jacqueline, our participant. Look at these hands. They're perhaps bigger, less elongated, less delicate. Male hands, she felt. And then others in our group started building on what Jacqueline had observed and noticed, if you look at the kinds of lines that are used to delineate or outline this figure, they're all smooth, even rounded in some ways, right? No sharp edges, no sharp lines. If we look by contrast at this figure, what do we have? We have straight, hard line, angular delineation of the torso, as though broad shoulders coming to a smaller waist and hips. The way the figure is sitting on its knees with feet underneath, Jacqueline also felt that that was something a woman would do more than a man. You may agree or disagree with these observations, but it's something to think about, isn't it? Do we have a mix of women and men in this painting? We haven't yet talked about that central figure. Male, female, figure in transition, neutral, we don't know, right? This all brought us to transition ourselves from what we see to what's the story here? Several of our group felt that they weren't sure why, but this looked like a biblical story to them, a reference to a biblical story. So we immediately started trying to remember, is it the Archangel Michael who plays a horn? No, that doesn't sound right. Gabriel's the one who plays the horn, right? So what if this is Gabriel in the center, blowing his horn? As we said a little bit earlier, we can imagine the sound of his horn resonating. So we're not just seeing, we're feeling that sound, that clarion sound, right? If it's Gabriel blowing his horn, then some of us are not terribly educated when it comes to biblical stories. And so there was a little struggling going on to try to remember the story of Gabriel. But as we were doing that, one of our members, Nancy, said, you know, I could make up a whole story around this painting. And we said, go ahead, please. She said, at the lower left, right here, it looks like there's a representation. The artist has represented little peaks, right? Little peaks here. And Nancy said, maybe that means that these figures have crossed mountains to get where they are. Maybe that's why we see one of them kind of looking like he might be stumbling a bit or tired. But anyway, so maybe they crossed mountains to get here. And then she said, at the lower right, we see what might be representations of waves. So have they also crossed a river or an ocean, water? We have changes in terrain. So perhaps they've gone up and down, or they've come from below. So she said, with all of this, she said, the light, which we hadn't really talked about yet, and we haven't here either, but she said, it looks like there's light, these swaths of light coming down from above, maybe even lightning. And maybe that is God sending a signal to welcome everyone who has arrived. Gabriel is blowing the horn to let them know you've gotten where you want to be. He has this key in his hand. Maybe it's the key to the city, someone else said, or maybe the key to freedom, to salvation. What do you think of that story? It seems to really take into account a lot of the elements of this painting, doesn't it? And it again suggests to us that Gabriel, the central figure, the large figure, the figure making the sound, blowing the trumpet, is somehow, in some ways, over these other figures. We don't know how yet, unless you're very familiar with the story of Gabriel. But anyway, we all came to the conclusion, maybe this is a moment of reckoning of some sort. It's a moment of celebration. We've arrived. Maybe it's a moment of joy. Here's the key to the kingdom to let us in. Maybe those who are stumbling or those who are raising their hands in what may not be joy, maybe it's fear, maybe there's something else going on there. So that is the story that we got to. And it seems like it's time now for me to tell you a bit about this painting, the artist who made it, and his inspiration for the subject matter. So the artist was Aaron Douglas. He was a central figure of the Harlem Renaissance in the early 20th century, an extraordinary flowering of the arts centered in the Mecca of arts for African Americans, Harlem, New York. In the Harlem Renaissance, you not only had the flowering of every kind of art making, music, poetry, nonfiction writing, visual art, but there was this remarkable interweaving of the various forms of art. So music would play off of a poet's poetry. A visual work would make reference to a particular song or piece of music, or to a particular poem. So it was a truly remarkable moment in the history of art. And Aaron Douglas is often described by art historians as having been the father of Black art, African American art in this country, visual art. So that tells you a little bit about Aaron Douglas. Let me tell you a little bit more about the painting itself. It was painted by Douglas in 1939, based on an illustration that he had created more than a decade before to accompany a highly respected Black poet, James Weldon Johnson's book of poems titled God's Trombones, 7 Negro Sermons in Verse. And what was really stunning about this book of poetry was Johnson had been inspired by charismatic Black preachers and had kind of channeled that oratory in his poetry. And then, in turn, Douglas, the visual artist, had been inspired by Johnson's poetry. So one of the poems that make up God's Trombones is a poem titled The Judgment Day. And this is a painting called The Judgment Day. Before I quote a little bit from the poem while you're looking at the work of art, that you can see how they intersect, let me just say that, again, this painting by Aaron Douglas, called The Judgment Day, was painted in 1939. It's oil on tempered hardboard, which is a kind of very dense fiberboard. And the size of the painting is 48 inches, so 4 feet by 36 inches. 4 feet tall, 36 inches wide. So now, as you're thinking about all of the things that we noticed as we were looking at the painting, as you're thinking about Nancy's story that she made up looking at the painting, let me read you a little bit from James Johnson's poem, The Judgment Day. In that great day, people, in that great day, God's are going to rain down fire. God's are going to sit in the middle of the air to judge the quick and the dead. Early one of these mornings, God's are going to call for Gabriel, that tall, bright angel Gabriel. And God's are going to say to him, Gabriel, blow your silver trumpet and wake the living nations. And Gabriel's going to ask him, Lord, how loud must I blow it? And God's are going to tell him, Gabriel, blow it calm and easy. Then putting one foot on the mountaintop and the other in the middle of the sea. So 1 foot on the mountaintop, Nancy got it, and 1 foot in the middle of the sea, again, that water that Nancy talked about. Gabriel's going to stand and blow his horn to wake the living nations. Then God's going to say to him, Gabriel, once more blow your silver trumpet and wake the nations underground. And Gabriel's going to ask him, Lord, how loud must I blow it? And God's going to tell him, Gabriel, like 7 peals of thunder. Then the tall, bright angel, Gabriel, will put 1 foot on the battlements of heaven and the other on the steps of hell and blow that silver trumpet till he shakes old hell's foundations. And I'm going to skip a little further on. And the living and the dead, in the twinkling of an eye, are caught up in the middle of the air before God's judgment bar. It's pretty remarkable poetry, isn't it? And you can see this painting coming to life in the context of that poem. And also the painting bringing the poem to life. That's all we have time for today. I'll be back in a moment to wrap things up and say goodbye. Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation about that remarkable painting by Aaron Douglas, based on a poem by James Johnson, both of them huge figures in the Harlem Renaissance. It's unusual in these videos for us to have such a coming together of music and visual art, but we sure had it today, didn't we? I hope this has invigorated you to look more at the painting now that you've heard part of the poem, and it was only a small part of the poem that I read you. Go back to that poem, The Judgment Day, by James Johnson. Go back to the painting by Aaron Douglas, also titled The Judgment Day. It's an amazing testament to the power of story, whether that's a biblical story, whether it's a story that we bring to our understanding of a painting. It really moves us, doesn't it? I've so enjoyed being with you today. I hope you've enjoyed yourself as well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much on behalf of Dementia Society of America and ARTZ Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us for ARTFul Insights. Take care.